This week on Newsnight, local leaders face pressure from immigration advocates over state requirements to comply with federal enforcement agents. Plus, a look at new Central Florida data on homelessness as communities struggle with solutions to the region's unsheltered population. Newsnight starts now.
Hello, I'm Steve Maud. Welcome to Newsnight, where we take an in-depth look at the top stories and issues in Central Florida and how they shape our community. First tonight, the continuing debate over immigration. While the fight over the Trump administration's deportation efforts plays out in the courts, a federal judge placed a recently enacted Florida immigration law on hold. That law, which makes entering the state as a, quote, unauthorized alien a first-degree misdemeanor, has already resulted in several arrests, including that of a U.S. citizen. Meanwhile, local governments are navigating another recent state requirement for law enforcement agencies to cooperate with federal ICE operations.
In March, the Orlando Police Department joined other law enforcement agencies around the state in signing a 287G agreement with ICE. Every Florida county and many cities as well have entered into arrangements whereby ICE agents train local and state officers in immigration enforcement so they can work closely with federal authorities. At recent meetings of both the Orlando City Council and the Orange County Commission, immigration advocates have voiced concern.
Orange County cannot be complicit in separating families, violating due process, and putting immigrants in danger. This agreement with ICE doesn't make our community safer. It makes people afraid.
In Orlando earlier this month, Mayor Dyer responded by voicing support for the city's Trust Act, passed in 2018, that prevents city employees from asking about the immigration status of crime victims and witnesses. That sparked Florida Attorney General James Uffmeyer to describe the Trust Act as unlawful, in violation of Florida's 2019 anti-sanctuary city policy, and to threaten penalties. In a response, Mayor Dyer did not mention the Trust Act, but wrote, "Neither I nor the Orlando Police Department have any intention of violating federal or state law."
Good afternoon.
The Orlando Sentinels reported that the Trust Act is under legal review by city attorneys, but remains in place for now.
We are the ones creating
Orlando Commissioner Tony Ortiz says he thinks the Trust Act does not conflict with state law.
I really hope that the Attorney General read our Trust Act, because I think it's a good piece. They thought that the Trust Act was like opposing whatever actions the government, the state level or the federal level are doing, and it was not so. The Trust Act is nothing but an expansion of the bias-free policy of the Orlando Police Department.
Commissioner Ortiz there. Well, let's bring in our panel now to break it all down. Joining us in the studio this week, Ryan Gillespie, covers local government for the Orlando Sentinel. Thanks for coming in as always, Ryan.
Happy to be here.
Good to see you. Randy Hildreth from Fox 35. Nice to see you today, Randy.
Good to be here.
Thanks for coming in. And for the first time joining the fray, Donovan Myrie from WKMG News 6. Good to see you today, Donovan.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much for coming in today. We should note we are recording this program, by the way, on Thursday morning, so things can change by airtime. You can find a link to Ryan's reporting on the review of Orlando's Trust Act on our website, wcf.org/newsnight, along the bottom of your screen. Ryan, let me start with you on the Trust Act, if we can. You talked with Mayor Dyer, right, following the back and forth with the Attorney General on this issue. What's your understanding of where the city stands now on this?
I mean, essentially nothing has changed, right? Like they passed this policy in 2018, which basically bans police, really any city employee, so you can imagine, code enforcement or anything like that, from asking somebody's immigration status if they're not breaking a law. The purpose of it was, they want people to report crime and to be comfortable talking to police if they're witnesses of crime without fears of being deported. So that policy's been in place since 2018, and for all intents and purposes, nothing has changed. Their lawyers are looking at it after this back and forth with the state AG, James Uffmeyer. They're making sure that everything is legal, but for the last 7 years, they've believed that this is legal, and for all intents and purposes, they believe it still is, as far as I know.
Right. I mean, the Attorney General said, that he was pleased that the mayor had reversed course, but you kind of alluded to that there. I mean, did the mayor really reverse course, given that this law remains in place? I mean, we heard there from Commissioner Ortiz saying he doesn't reckon that this particular ordinance conflicts with state law at all.
Right. And so I was a little confused by that part of the back and forth, because if you read Mayor Dyer's response, nowhere there does he say that anything about the Trust Act. Trust Act actually is not even in the letter. The words
In his response, that's
yeah,
right.
the words
Yeah.
trust and act do not appear in his letter. But I had quoted the mayor a week prior, before this back and forth, talking about their dealings with ICE, and he said at the time, as I quoted him, "We will follow state and federal law." That is what he said in his response a week later to the state AG. He believes, and they believe, for the last 7 years, that the Trust Act does not violate state and federal law. They're looking at it again, just to be sure. But yeah, nothing has really changed at this point.
Gotcha. Let's just step back a little bit, Donovan. News 6 has obviously covered this, but I was kind of interested to remind our viewers about the reasoning for passing the Trust Act in the first place in 2018.
You know, it's interesting. I was looking back at this, and 2018 seems so long ago, 7
Yeah,
years ago.
sure.
Remember, we were in the middle of Trump's first presidency, and this was, hey, I want to build a wall, and Mexico needs to pay for it. And
Right.
remember, that was over and over and over again. And this was the city's way of saying, we are including people, we are diversified. You know, we are not building a wall and basically asking you, you know, what is your immigration status, you know, if you came in to complain about your trash or something like that.
Yeah, the local response to the Trump administration's moves on immigration in the first term was certainly different from what we're seeing now. I mean, it got a pretty warm reception at the time, right, from immigration advocates when the Trust Act was passed.
Yeah, certainly. There was this big effort that spanned months to get the city to do something. And at first, they kind of were a little skeptical on what they could and couldn't do.
Yeah.
This group called the Orlando Trust Coalition, which was a group of immigration advocates, really got together with Commissioner Tony Ortiz, who we just heard from, to put this together. Mind you, Tony Ortiz is one of 2 Republicans on that board. He's a retired law enforcement officer. And really his interest in this was, when he was a street cop, he was running into this all the time. Immigrants were often the victims of crime, and they were often the hardest crimes to solve because they were either scared to report it generally, and if they did report it, or if they witnessed it happening to somebody else, they didn't want to talk to police, because you don't know, the common person doesn't necessarily know maybe the difference between an Orlando police officer and a sheriff's officer and a NICE official. You don't know.
They both say police on them.
Exactly, and you don't really know maybe where the powers start and stop.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about those 287G agreements. I'll come to you in a moment, Randy. Florida law now requires local and state cooperation with federal immigration authorities. The Orange County Commission approved an agreement last month. Here's Orange County Mayor Jerry Demings at that meeting. Take a listen.
I asked the sheriff a question about how many persons did he think in Orange County potentially would be impacted. These are persons who are somehow involved with immigration and customs officials. And the sheriff's response was they are estimating 50,000 to 75,000 people that are subject to some type of ICE intervention. They have about 10,000 signed orders of removal in Orange County. So what he's saying there is there are approximately 10,000 persons in Orange County who have signed removals that ICE is in search of to remove them from the U.S.
Mayor Jerry Demings there. Randy, let me come to you on this one. The Orange County Commission approved that agreement with ICE in March, but not without significant disagreement, right? You covered that hearing. What are the main fault lines on the commission there?
Yeah, there was a lot of discussion amongst commissioners, and there was also a lot of public comment about this. So ultimately not unanimous, 5-2. But even some of the commissioners who voted in favor of this memo said, I felt like I had to do this because my job was on the line.
Yeah.
But let's talk about those 2 no votes. They came from District 1 Commissioner Nicole Wilson and District 5 Commissioner Kelly Simrad. And in their conversation, in their pushback about this, they brought up some concerns about when we have someone in custody, is that person going to get due process? Commissioner Wilson told me when I did a one-on-one interview that she felt like these are additional job requirements for these correctional officers because now they will have the ability to serve search warrants. And who's going to pay for this extra responsibility within this role? Kelly Simrad, in her concerns, very similar to Commissioner Wilson's, but she talked a lot about what can Orange County do if we're going to agree to this memo? And so she challenged the board to come up with some parameters about what would this look like in terms of implementation here. She wanted to make sure that Orange County at least had parameters for how long a person is in custody before a family member is notified, to make sure that people are able to keep track of their loved ones.
And that due process question has been something that we've seen playing out on the national level as well. Ryan, your colleague Steve Hudak's been covering the Orange County discussions on immigration. I wonder what the county says it's expecting in terms of cooperation with ICE.
Yeah, I mean, they certainly, this week Mayor Jerry Dimming said that it's pretty clear that ICE activity in Orange County is ramping up. The jail chief said this week that they had 20 arrests for ICE inmates on Monday. He expected 20 on Tuesday. Through last week, basically, there had been something like 800 people on ICE detainers, which is much more than last year. So the county right now is signed this 287G agreement, with the sheriff's office did, and so they go through this training. It takes a little bit. I believe they're pretty close to being done if they aren't done already. And then that allows them, if requested by ICE, to participate in some of their arrests and acting basically as a deputized ICE agency. Every county in the state of Florida has signed this agreement as required by law. And at this point, most cities have. Orlando, most notably, and basically every other city in our area of any size has also signed an agreement. So, here in a couple of months, almost every law enforcement agency in the state of Florida is going to be able to be deputized on behalf of ICE.
Before we move on, we should mention that law that I referred to at the top of the program, Randy, which makes it a crime to enter Florida as an undocumented immigrant. The courts are weighing in on that. What is the status at the moment of the state's ability to enforce that statute right now?
There has been a lot of back and forth about this. We know that U.S. District Court Judge Kathleen Williams issued an order to stop that. This was early in April 4th, but it appears that some law enforcement agencies have not listened to that. As recently as Friday, the judge had to essentially remind everyone that this is what I said and this is what you cannot do. Now, with that context, there's also been back and forth with state officials. The Florida Attorney General initially issued a memo to law enforcement and said, we need to stop doing this per the judge. But as recently as Wednesday, reversed course and has now told law enforcement agencies that they can enforce this immigration law.
At least there's nothing that maybe he can do to prevent that from happening.
Exactly. And so we could potentially see more arrests, even though the judges said not to do this. And as you mentioned, there's a hearing coming up April 29th where this will again be hashed out.
Be interested to see what the judge says on that. On the federal level, Orlando Congressman Maxwell Frost and other House Democrats traveled to El Salvador this week amid the controversy over the deportation of Kilmar Abrego Garcia. But Chair of the House Oversight Committee, James Comer, denied a request for an official congressional delegation, so no public funds could be used to pay for it. Frost addressed that after returning to Orlando on Tuesday.
This is the partisanship a lot of people don't like in this country. We requested an official codel because we knew that the government there could use us not going officially as a reason for us not to see him. We did what you're supposed to do. We sent a very respectful letter to Comer, actually saying this should be a bipartisan trip. Let's go together, even if you disagree with us. And not only did he deny it, but I encourage people to read the letter. He sent a very unprofessional, inappropriate letter that probably was written by the administration themselves, and sent that to us instead, which shows there's no good faith here. This is a joke to them.
Congressman Frost there. We've put that letter from Oversight Committee Chair Comer to the Democrats regarding the trip on our website. You can read it for yourself at wcf.org/newsnight along the bottom of your screen. Donovan, let me come to you first on this one. And News 6 has been watching that trip to El Salvador. What was the reason given for denying that funding?
These things happen all the time. This one made headlines because Comer was looking to basically make a statement, to take a stand. A lot of people, I should say there are some people in politics in Washington that really don't like Maxwell Frost. Okay,
as pretty high-profile Democrat,
and very young, a very young high-profile Democrat, and they don't like the attention that he's gotten. Okay, and this is a way of shutting down that young whippersnapper, I guess you could say. But I think really a lot of this was basically to show that unified Republican front. And, he said it before, this is now partisan politics, and partisan politics is creeping into so much of what we do that used to just happen on a day-to-day basis that we didn't really hear about. Now it's, hey, I'm going to take a stand, make a statement, and, and what was the headline afterward? Maxwell Frost claps back at that particular statement. And then basically they went on their own.
And of course, Republicans would say that they're deporting people that shouldn't be here to protect the public. You'll find a link to Florida's immigration law on entering the state without documents on our website, wcf.org/Newsnight. Meanwhile, you can find us on social media. We're at WCF TV on Facebook and Instagram. You'll also find us at Newsnight WCF on X. Next tonight, we're checking in on the homelessness issue in Central Florida, with more data expected soon on the number of unhoused people in our region. Earlier this month, the point-in-time data for Orange, Osceola, and Seminole counties showed the number of people experiencing homelessness remained flat year on year, but advocates say Florida's recent camping ban makes finding unsheltered people harder, and that the real number is likely much higher. Meanwhile, data from the point-in-time count for Brevard is set to be released in May, as Crystal Knowles reports.
Okay, I'm Michelle. I'll try and keep an eye on you and stuff.
For the past 8 years, Michelle Green hits the streets of Cocoa and Merritt Island, listening to the stories of Brevard County's homeless during the point-in-time count. In the wake of Florida's camping ban, Green says the figures coming out next month will likely show a small decrease.
I interviewed less, but as I know from doing outreach on like a weekly basis, I know there's more than there were last year. So I feel like we are probably undercounted this year.
The pit count is a snapshot of the homeless population, both sheltered and unsheltered, on a specific date in January. One of the questions on the list: how did you end up on the streets?
Most of us are one crisis away from being in the same situation. Either one year we asked what was the first reason you became homeless, and whether it was a medical issue, a family change, employment, different situations that just ended them into homeless, and then how hard it is to get out.
According to the Brevard Homeless Coalition, the count was done at the end of January by more than 150 volunteers throughout the county. After 8 years getting to know the homeless community in her area, Green understands how fragile financial stability can be, especially for those on a fixed income. She says the soaring insurance rates are only compounding the problem.
Was talking to my husband about, what happens when we're on Social Security we just got another bump on homeowners insurance. We won't be able, we wanted to die here. I don't think we'll be able to.
The point-in-time count numbers are reported each year to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development and are used to apply for federal funding to support local programs.
Crystal Knowles reporting. Crystal's story is part of a collaborative initiative of independent local news outlets working towards a more informed and engaged Central Florida. Donovan, News 6 is part of that collaborative. First off, what are we seeing in the numbers for Metro Orlando?
Well, the Orlando numbers went up a whopping 5 people from 2,776 to 2,781. The folks who do the pit count in Orlando, that is the Homeless Services Network, HSN, they have done a lot to help people get off the streets, to put them in shelters, to put them in temporary housing, to put them in permanent housing. But Martha R., who is the CEO of the Homeless Services Network, she said, and I wrote this down to make sure I got it right, there are places where we've historically been able to find people, and they were not there this year. The camping ban is having an effect. Basically, people get moved, and it used to be, I can find you, I kind of know where you are. These are people who work with homeless people all the time. They're not finding those people because those people are scared to be arrested. We've had a series of arrests in the Orlando-Orange County area. I think Seminole County has arrested just one person. Is it still just one? Winter Park has gone forward and dedicated 2 of their officers to homeless outreach. It's kind of like this mishmash of everybody's reacting, but there's really no cohesive plan to it.
Yeah. This data came out since we last talked, Ryan. We heard Michelle Green there in Brevard just now describe the likelihood of an undercount when their data comes out next month. What do you read into the data so far that you've looked at in Orange, Osceola, Seminole?
Sure. So I think it's important to note, this is done annually, right? This count. In any year, even camping ban, it was always deemed an undercount, because if you just think of the point of, if you're somebody who is homeless and unsheltered, generally the point of it is you're trying to evade detection, right? Like, a lot of people are in the woods. This has maybe pushed more people into the woods or deeper into the woods. So what we've seen is we saw slight decreases in Orange and Seminole County, and we saw an increase in Osceola County. A bit of context for that, if we go back to last year, a woman named Olga Gonzalez, who was then the mayor of Kissimmee, runs a charity where a bunch of unsheltered people and homeless people gather for services. For whatever reason last year, she did not allow volunteers from the point in time count to count people at her charity. That is some context. She, of course, denies that. We have numerous sources who say otherwise. So there's a bit of context for that in Osceola. I think everybody expected there to be a steeper increase this year. That did not happen, but I think it's fair to assume that there's an undercount.
Well, let's talk about the shelter issue. Randy, you've looked at the homelessness issue too. What have advocates told you in your reporting, especially about that lack of shelter that we keep experiencing?
Yeah, so even if we're only seeing slight fluctuations year to year with homeless numbers, when we go back to the pandemic to now, we have seen a significant increase in the number of people who don't have a home. And as we've seen that number go up, we have not seen an increase in bed capacity at shelters. So right now, there are not a lot of places for people to go, and cities and counties are navigating this. They have the legal obligation to take care of this, but it is also expensive to build a shelter or even expand a shelter. It is time consuming. This is not something that you can do, say in March, you're going to do this and it is in place by the end of the month. And so they are finding some challenges with that. There are some agencies that are working with cities and counties to create some creative options to address that. Orlando's working with the Christian Service Center to get this, what's called the 407 Connect bus in place, up and running. And it is an option that is a project they're moving forward with, and it has gotten things going very quickly. It was approved, I believe, at the end of March. I just talked with the agency, and they are targeting July 15th as availability for this. And it's essentially converting 2 Greyhound buses, putting beds on the buses, and so it will pick people up, give them a place to go overnight, and they will take them to the Christian Service Center. They will work with a caseworker to try to get them access to the resources that they need to get on their feet. The positive is that this is a shelter option for people, but there has been some criticism and pushback because these Greyhound buses will be able to accommodate 40 people, and that is, just very slowly chipping away at a bigger issue.
Yeah, there was a community meeting at the Samaritan Resource Center on Thursday in East Orange County. That's after we recorded this discussion to talk about solutions to the homelessness crisis. Ryan, you've covered the difficulties of creating shelter solutions, and you and I have talked about that a lot here on the program, particularly after that location in Sodo was rejected by the city. Are there any other potential solutions in the pipeline?
I mean, not to the scale of what this region needs. If we use last year's math, this region needed roughly 1,000 more shelter beds than it has. I think it's fair to say that number's higher now, 1,100, 1,200, something like that. The county has said that they are looking at sites in East and West Orange County, but they've also been looking at sites in East and West Orange County for the better part of a year, and we haven't had a plan come forward. This past week, there was a hearing from this group called, I believe it's Kaleo Ministries, in East Orange County at Colonial Drive and 417 area to build this shelter. That one also seems maybe not likely to move forward for a number of reasons, one of them being neighborhood pushback. There's also some concerns that this is a facility that was shut down by the fire marshal because of fire safety violations. They had something like 38 code enforcement violations over years that they didn't solve and racked up millions of dollars in fines. So the county has concerns there for a number of reasons, one of them being, is this going to be a good partner in this fight? So it is remarkably difficult to build shelter space, but also I'm not quite sure how many local elected officials have the stomach to pursue it. Outside of the city and the county, city of Orlando and the county, there hasn't really been much movement on this.
But what about that public buy-in question when it comes to creating more shelter? News 6 has been asking Central Florida residents how they view the homelessness issue. What have you guys been hearing?
We get a lot of not in my neighborhood. And that's tough. It is very tough. We saw this down in SoDo where, this was set. The people of SoDo were very upset that this happened somewhat behind the scenes, that it was sprung upon them. And I have not seen a community rally like that around a particular subject in a long time. And there was significant pushback. I was getting calls from people I haven't spoken to in years. Hey, what can I do about this? What do you know about this? Do you know about this? We're slowly gathering things and comments from people. I got a letter the other day, actually just last night, of a woman, and it seems that the big complaint is none of this is run well. But as all of us can tell you, it's the best it can be for right now. As we go forward, this is basically going to be something that's going to be with us for years and years and years.
Yeah, I think hearing from the public is an important part of that, and we're asking that question online too. Would you be comfortable with a shelter opening in your neighborhood? And if so, under what circumstances? Let us know your feelings about the homelessness issue in Central Florida. We have a survey up on our website to gather the views of the community over the next few weeks on this important issue. You'll find it at wcf.org/Newsnight. But that is all the time we have for this week. My thanks to Ryan Gillespie from the Orlando Sentinel, Randy Hildreth, Fox 35, Donovan Myrie, great debut from WKMG News 6. Thank you guys so much for coming in. Really appreciate your time. We'll see you next Friday night at 8:30 here on WCF. From all of us here at Newsnight, take care and have a great week.